Welcome to the Olive Grove Podcast, and welcome back to another deep dive.
Good to be here.
Today, we're digging into some really fascinating material. It's derived from an online study, and it's all centered around Hosea chapter 9. And it tackles a question that, well, it feels incredibly relevant both then and now. How is it possible for people to be so blinded by the very things they've been blessed with that they completely miss God's truth?
That's right. This study excerpt, it takes us through Israel's experience in Hosea, really highlighting their journey, and then it draws some, well, surprisingly sharp parallels to modern times. Very relevant.
Exactly. So our mission in this deep dive, and we're drawing it strictly from this specific source material, is to unpack those key insights.
Okay.
We want to see what it teaches us about ancient Israel's path, and maybe more importantly, how those lessons might just apply to where we are today.
Sounds good. Let's jump right into it. The study points immediately to a central theme from Hosea 9, verse 1, specifically this significant danger of being blinded by prosperity.
Right. And the way the source describes Israel's situation is pretty vivid. They were looking at their abundant crops, their material wealth, and really celebrating it.
They seem to genuinely think this material blessing was a sign that God was, totally fine with them, pleased even.
But the prophet Hosea's message, at least as interpreted here, is stark. They had actually turned their backs on God, who was their true provider.
Right. And because of that turning away, the source says, God saw them as being like prostitutes, chasing after other lovers instead of him. Pretty strong imagery.
Very strong. And what's striking, as this study points out, is how similar this can look today. People can become just as blinded by their prosperity, can't they?
Absolutely. They attribute success solely to themselves, to their hard work or their cleverness, completely neglecting God's hand in it all.
And because they don't truly acknowledge him as the source, their worship isn't really for him. It's often for the prosperity itself.
Yeah, it gets twisted. And the study even brings it down to a very specific level, comparing this mindset to how it can manifest in places of worship today.
Oh.
How so?
Well, it talks about the focus shifting sometimes to building big, fancy buildings, rejoicing in what you might call a fancy campus, but maybe without realizing they're actually drifting away from the core message of God's word in the process. Yes, and the source adds a practical, maybe even uncomfortable layer to this. It points out that often these buildings are financed through significant debt, making the organization effectively, well, enslaved to the mortgage.
Right, the financial pressure.
Exactly. And this pressure, the study suggests, can lead to preaching messages that people want to hear, sort of tailored just to fill seats and run in enough money to cover those big payments.
Wow.
It even draws a parallel to the church in Sardis, from Revelation 3.
Oh, yes.
Which had this reputation for being spiritually alive, but was actually dead. It looked good on the outside, sure, but the spiritual reality was, well, hollow. So this blindness, born out of prosperity, it creates a kind of spiritual disconnect, potentially leading to a focus on outward appearance or, like you said, financial necessity over genuine spiritual depth.
That seems to be the core danger highlighted.
Okay, so what does the source say happens next then, as a consequence of this turning away?
Well, the study moves into the consequences detailed in Hosea 9, verses 2 through 5. Because they turn their back on God as their provider, trusting instead in their material blessings, the inevitable result is famine. The threshing floor and the winepress, these symbols of their agricultural abundance, they would fail.
And the tragic result of that, according to the study, is that they'd be forced to go to surrounding countries just to find food. The text says things like, Ephraim will return to Egypt, and they would eat unclean food in Ashur.
And here's where the significance really lies. The source explains that this unclean food wasn't just, any old food. It was food forbidden by God's law. And crucially, it meant they couldn't use it for sacrifices or worship God in a way that was pleasing to him. Their sustenance was reduced merely to satisfying their physical appetite.
Just filling their bellies.
Exactly. It wasn't integrated into their relationship with God or used in his house for worship.
That's a powerful illustration of the disconnect, isn't it? Their basic needs could only be met by relying on the world, with food that separated them further from God's design for worship.
And the study highlights the question posed in the text as particularly poignant. What will you do at a designated time on a day which is a festival for Adonai?
Using Adonai there.
Yeah.
The source is emphasizing the covenant name for God, right?
Precisely. And the question implies that their religious activities, their festivals, they would become utterly meaningless if their foundation was broken, if their food and provision came from pagan nations and was ritually unclean.
How could they genuinely celebrate God's festivals?
Exactly. It really underlines the emptiness of religious activity when it's divorced from a right relationship with God as the true provider.
Yeah. Okay, so the study then looks at their attempts to escape these consequences in Hosea 9.6.
Right. And in a deep irony, the source points out that in trying to escape God's discipline and the consequences of their choices, the people would actually run right back into a form of slavery.
Oh, wow. How?
Ending up back in Egypt. The text says, Egypt will round them up. Memphis will bury them.
So trying to avoid the correction for ignoring their true provider leads them back to being captured and buried in places associated with their original bondage, like Memphis in Egypt. That's ironic, isn't the right word, tragic.
It is. And the source interprets this specifically as them not understanding that God is the great provider. They sought provision and safety elsewhere, but it just led them back to captivity and death.
And the modern parallel drawn here is potent.
Very. Losing sight of God as the ultimate provider can lead people today, the study suggests, to become, quote, slaves to one or more jobs.
Why? What's the driver?
Just to buy things, Chasing after the latest and greatest gadget or lifestyle, it becomes its own kind of bondage.
That connection really resonates. When our focus shifts from recognizing God's provision to chasing possessions and security on our own terms, well, it can easily lead us into being driven by work and debt in a different kind of servitude.
Exactly. This theme of recognizing God as the source of all things provision, freedom, purpose, it's just fundamental, isn't it?
Absolutely. So after ignoring the warnings and facing consequences, how did Israel react to God's messengers? The study looks at verse 7 for this.
Yes. The text says the days of punishment had come and Israel knew it. They weren't ignorant.
Okay, so they knew. But instead of listening or repenting, their reaction, according to the source, was extreme.
Very extreme. They called the prophet a fool. They even said the man of the Spirit had gone crazy.
Wow, attacking the messenger. Why such hostility?
The source attributes this hostility directly to their deep sinfulness, their great iniquity. That spiritual corruption led to intense antagonism against the one bringing God's message. Simple as that, really.
And the modern parallel here is, well, it's unmistakable, isn't it?
It really is. Someone warning people today about potential judgment, or about the consequences of continuing on a certain path, or even just about the importance of being ready for Jesus' return,
Is often treated the same way, dismissed as a religious nut or something similar.
it's a pattern the study clearly identifies. Reject the truth, face consequences, then lash out at the messenger. It's a cycle.
From there, the source delves further into the depth of Israel's corruption, described in Hosea 9, verses 8 and 9.
Right. It highlights that the prophet faced actual snares and hostility, even within the context of what should have been God's house or, sacred spaces.
Even in supposedly safe places.
Exactly. And the source then draws a very strong, very sobering comparison to the days of Gibeah.
Or Gibeah, right, from Judges.
Yes, Judges chapter 19. The source describes that time as one of great lawlessness, reaching the very depths of depravity. It even compares it to the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah.
And the reason.
The key reason given for Gibeah's state was a complete lack of leadership. No one was guiding them in the right way.
So the study is saying that the prophet's warning to Israel in Hosea's time was that they were in a condition mirroring that incredibly dark period in their history.
Precisely. A really chilling warning.
And the connection to today.
The source makes a stark connection to our world, observing that many of the very sins from Gibeah are happening now. And perhaps more disturbingly, quote, leaders are even making it legal.
Oof.
Yeah. The study emphasizes the text's clear message, though. God will remember their guilt, and he will punish their sins. It's a serious warning.
That's a powerful and, frankly, unsettling comparison.
Yeah.
Okay, so from that point of deep corruption, the source transitions to how Israel, which started out full of promise, turned to shame. That's Hosea 9.0.
Yes. God's initial view of Israel was incredibly positive, just full of hope. The text uses beautiful imagery like finding grapes in the desert or fig trees first figs. They were meant to be a delight, a promising first fruit for him.
But then they came to Baal-Peor. Remind us what happened there.
This was near the end of their wilderness journey. They got involved with the Moabites, started worshiping their god, Baal, and, got involved in deeply immoral practices associated with that worship.
A major turning point.
A huge one. And the source puts it plainly. At Balpur, they dedicated themselves to something shameful, and as a result, they became loathsome as the thing they loved.
Wow. Their identity became fused with the very idolatry they embraced.
That's the idea. And the source's modern application of this moment is incredibly relevant, I think. God still sees our potential, our promising future, and calls us to align with his perfect will.
What?
But we face the exact same choice Israel did at Balpur, to cling to Jesus or to bow to all the false idols around us. The choice is still there.
And this decision, this turning away to idols,
Yeah.
it has devastating consequences, right? The study details this in verses 11 through 14, especially for future generations.
Yes, the impact is profound. The loss is described as a loss of their glory, which the source interprets here specifically as their children.
Their children, how so?
The text describes no birth, no pregnancy, no conception, and children who are born are destroyed, brought to the slaughterer. It's incredibly harsh.
That is harsh.
And importantly, the source highlights that Hosea 9.4:1 makes it explicit that this judgment, including wombs that miscarry and dried up breasts, is directly from God. It's not just circumstance.
Yeah.
And the source points out, crucially, that Israel couldn't blame their difficult surroundings for this. They were, quote, planted in a pleasant place.
Right. You mentioned that. Their downfall wasn't due to harsh circumstances, but internal corruption.
Exactly. But their hearts led them to idolatry, and their kids would tragically pay the price for their parents' choices.
And here's a really thought-provoking modern relevance the source draws from that.
Which is?
Our actions towards God have a big impact on the lives of our children.
Absolutely. It even suggests that when we criticize the younger generation for their issues, it might actually be a reflection of our spiritual health as a people.
How do you mean?
Perhaps it's a sign that we ourselves, like ancient Israel, have been blinded by prosperity and have, maybe unknowingly, led the way down a path of compromise or spiritual neglect.
Wow. That adds a heavy layer of responsibility, doesn't it, for any generation that is turned away?
It certainly does.
Okay, the study then uncovers a specific origin point for some of their wickedness, mentioned in Hosea 9.1516, a place called Gilgal.
Right, Gilgal, what happened there? According to the source, that's where Saul was made the first king of Israel.
And why was that bad?
The source explains it was bad because Israel already had God himself as their king, but they rejected his direct rule because they wanted a man, a human king, just like the surrounding nations had.
Ah, so Gilgal represents a foundational compromise, a rejection of God's intended leadership model in favor of conforming to the world around them.
Exactly that. And the source notes that this decision at Gilgal began, quote, a very long string of leaders who consistently led the people deeper and deeper into idolatry over the centuries.
So one bad decision with long-term consequences.
Very long term. The study asks, how could they do such a thing, choosing a human king over their divine one? And then it suggests that, well, we often do the same today.
How does the source draw that modern parallel?
It says that instead of genuinely listening to and following God's direction through the Holy Spirit, many people today compromise to fit in with the crowds around them.
Just like Israel did with the surrounding nations.
When they demanded a king.
Oh, yeah.
It's about seeking acceptance from the world over obedience to God.
That brings it full circle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Back to that pressure to conform, the potential cost of seeking worldly acceptance over following God's unique path for us.
And this overall pattern, ignoring God's direction, often blinded by prosperity, drawn into compromise, it leads to the final penalty described in Hosea 9.17.
Which is
Becoming wanderers.
the cast aside,
Yes.
becoming wanderers among the Goyim.
Which the source translates as the Gentiles, the foreign nations.
Yeah.
They would be dispersed, without a homeland, without direction.
Like King.
Exactly. The source compares this state to Cain in Genesis 4, who became a restless wanderer after his sin, straying from safety and direction. The main point the study emphasizes from this whole chapter is just that. Israel ignored God's direction. They were blinded by their apparent prosperity and their desire to fit in.
And applying that principle for you, the listener, today, what's the takeaway?
Well, the source's conclusion is pretty clear. If we become blinded by prosperity, by worldly success or comforts, and we wander from God's direction, we become, quote, at the mercy of the world around them.
We lose our anchor.
We lose our anchor, our safety, staying focused on his leading, listening to the counselor, the Holy Spirit. That's what keeps us securely within his safety and purpose.
Okay, so pulling together the key takeaways then from this deep dive into the source's view of Hosea 9, we've seen the profound danger of allowing prosperity or worldly success to blind us to God's truth and His provision.
Right.
We've explored the severe consequences that follow when we turn away, whether that's through idolatry or seeking worldly acceptance. This study highlights that repeating pattern of rejecting God and His messengers, notes the potential impact of our choices on future generations.
A heavy point, that one.
It is. And ultimately, it underscores the vital need to stay focused on God's direction to avoid becoming lost and vulnerable in the world.
It's a powerful and, humbling message, isn't it? Demonstrating that the spiritual health of a people or an individual, it isn't measured by their material wealth or their worldly status, but by their relationship with God and their willingness to actually follow His path.
This certainly raises some important questions for you to consider as you go about your week. How might this ancient warning about being blinded by prosperity resonate in your life today?
And perhaps, thinking deeper, what does it truly mean for you to actively listen for and follow God's direction in a world that's just full of distractions and pressures to conform?
That's definitely something to mull over. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Hosea chapter 9, guided by the insights from this online study.
And we appreciate you coming along on this journey with us.
You've been listening to the Olive Grove Podcast. We hope you'll join us again next time.